Hi everybody, in this video I'm going to work on the Tai Chi technique of parting the wild horse's mane. This is one of the first techniques you'll learn as a Tai Chi practitioner, and it holds a lot of lessons not only for Tai Chi but also for movement in general. Let's go ahead and get started. Before we do, go ahead and click the like button and subscribe to the channel if you're not already a subscriber, and click on the bell to get notification for my future videos. Parting the wild horse's mane in the simplified 24 form is going to begin after the opening posture. And I'll just go through the opening posture without teaching that and get us to this position, into our horse stance. We're going to begin parting the wild horse's mane by shifting the weight to the right leg and beginning to raise the right arm. That's the first part of the motion. The second part is going to be shifting all the way into empty stance with the knee now facing in this opposite direction, 90 degrees from my original position. Then I'm going to step out onto the heel, lowering the body weight at the same time. Then I'm going to sink to allow the forefoot to lower. And then I'm going to shift forward. And as I shift forward, my left palm is going to come up and my right palm is going to go down towards my hip. And you'll notice at the end of that shift, my foot is going to pivot in about 45 degrees. So now I'm in a bow stance. The knee should be roughly lined up over your ankle, or maybe a little bit forward, but not forward past your toes. The spine should be vertical, and the body should remain relaxed. The eyes will be gazing in the direction of the movement. Let's break this down. When we are in the horse stance, after the position where I started off stepping out to the left, and it does make a difference which side you start on because the core movement is not symmetric. So you'll have to know that we're stepping out to the left here if we're going to start parting the wild horse's mane going off to the left. From this position, my core pattern here is in the core technique of elbow strike. I have flexion of my left hip. I have upper and lower waist rotation turning clockwise. So those are the core movements associated with this position here. If I turn my upper and lower waist to the right even more, you'll notice nothing happens because they're already in that position. And my left hip is pulling up from the ground, flexing, not extending. That's how I'm in this position. Flexion of the right hip, clockwise rotation of the upper and lower waist. Now, in order to begin parting the wild horse's mane, the first action is going to be to turn the upper waist from clockwise to counterclockwise. That's going to cause the weight to shift further to the right leg, and it's going to begin lifting the right arm. Now I have flexion of the left hip, counterclockwise rotation of the right upper waist, and clockwise rotation of the right lower waist. In order to release the leg into empty stance, I need to now turn the upper waist from counterclockwise back to clockwise. And now I'm back into elbow strike, flexion of the left hip and clockwise rotation of the upper and lower waist, putting me in this position with the carry the ball. you'll notice that the arm motions should be happening naturally because of the movements of the core. If I relax my arms into a limp position, what you'll notice is they don't really go anywhere structurally. My forearms relax, but my shoulders are stuck in this position because of the movement of the core. Let's go back again. Rotation counterclockwise from the upper waist. Now rotation clockwise from the upper waist. The lower waist did not change during that movement. When I sink, I have my lower waist active on the right. I'm rooting my right leg to the ground with that lower ab rotation. And that's going to stay constant during this motion. The other thing that's going to stay constant is that I have an active flexion of the left hip in this position. That's not going to change throughout this first movement. The only thing that's going to change is the upper part of the waist. That's going to control this, then this. Now I'm ready to step out. In order to step out onto the heel, what I'm going to change is my lower ab rotation, which is currently rooting my right leg. I'm going to tuck the waist on the left and change the root to the left, and that's going to cause the left leg to step out onto the heel. So now I have lower ab rotation going counterclockwise to the left, upper ab rotation going clockwise to the right. And I have flexion of my left hip. Now, in order to lower the forefoot, I'm going to take the lower ab rotation and turn it back to the right. So now I'm back in elbow strike. Then to shift forward, I'm going to flex my right hip and turn the waist, the lower waist, from right to left. And that's going to pull me into the movement of parting the wild horse's mane. I also want to help you understand this hip energy for parting the wild horse's mane a little bit better. As we're shifting into the motion, some people may think they're extending their right hip, but really we're flexing the right hip, pulling the spine forward into the motion. We're not pushing from the right hip. If we were to push from the right hip, that is what would happen. It would be a totally different motion. So we have to pull from the right hip in order to create that motion. That's what causes the splitting of the arms. I have rotation from the hip pulling in this direction. I have rotation from the upper part of the waist rotating in that direction. And I have rotation from the lower part of the waist rotating in this direction. The combination of all three of those is what creates the splitting action of the arms. Different from, let's say, brush knee. In brush knee, I'm starting here, and as I do the brush knee strike, you'll notice my left arm goes down and my right arm stays high as I am apparently doing what looks like the same rotation. My whole body is turning counterclockwise. Parting the wild horse's mane, brush knee. You can't explain the difference between those movements by saying we're using the whole waist to turn counterclockwise, because the arms are doing opposite things. Left arm going low to high, right arm going high to low, versus in brush knee, right arm staying high and left arm going high to low. So you have to understand the nuance of the rotation of the waist and of the hips. In brush knee, I'm extending from the glutes, and I also have torsional rotation on the right. In parting the wild horse's mane, I have flexion of my hip, not extension, and I have torsional rotation on the left. So the upper waist energy is turning clockwise in parting the wild horse's mane. It's turning counterclockwise in brush knee. So you have to understand the relationship between these three elements, which is not visible to the naked eye, which is why if we're just trying to understand Tai Chi based on watching somebody perform it, you're never going to really learn it well that way. To truly understand it, you have to see the invisible portions of the movement happening. And that's what I try to explain in these videos. Let's go back through this again. Counterclockwise rotation from the upper part of the waist to raise the arm. Clockwise rotation from the upper part of the waist to release the leg into empty stance. Use the lower abs on the left to tuck the pelvis, bringing the left heel out. Now lower the forefoot by turning the lower abs back to the right. Now we're going to shift into parting the wild horse's mane, powered by flexing the right hip. Currently, my left hip is flexed. I'm going to flex the right hip, which pulls the spine forward. Since I have weight on this leg, it's not going to lift this leg off the ground. It's going to pull the spine forward. And as I rotate, it's going to continue to keep me in a constant upright position, but that energy is going to move my weight in that direction. And as I do it, I'm going to change my root from right to left. So belly button is going to go from right to left during this action. Very important. Right rotation of the belly button, left rotation of the belly button as I flex my right hip. My right foot is able to pivot because the root was changed from right to left, unrooting the right leg during that weight shift, pulling the foot around to this 45-degree position. Once we're in this position, I'll back up, we're going to do parting the wild horse's mane right. The first thing we're going to do is shift back and pivot the left foot out. At the same time, the palms are going to turn over. Then I'm going to shift my weight forward. Then I'm going to collect again into empty stance. Step out with the heel, lower, and shift into parting the wild horse's mane. Raise the right forearm while shifting the weight partially. Collect into empty stance. Step out onto the heel. Lower the weight. Shift into parting the wild horse's mane. For the next motion, sink back, pivot out the left, shift forward, collect to empty stance, step out onto the heel, lower the weight, shift. Notice after the first one, there's no pivot necessary on that rear leg because it's already going to be angled in the right position because of the pivot that you do here. Now I'm going to mention the Tai Chi energies or the core techniques going along with each one of the motions. Right now I'm in elbow strike with flexion of my left hip. I'm now in split with flexion of my left hip. I'm now in elbow strike with flexion of my left hip. I'm now in press with flexion of my left hip. I'm now in elbow strike with flexion of my left hip. I'm now in split with flexion of my right hip. I'm going to shift into split with flexion of my left hip. Shift forward with split with flexion of the right hip. And then change to empty stance, elbow strike, flexion of the right hip. Press, flexion of the right hip. Elbow strike, flexion of the right hip. Split, flexion of the left hip. A common sequence that we're going to see in Tai Chi is the shifting into empty stance. And this is something that we see in many different movements, and we also do this constantly in our everyday lives, which I'll explain later. It's really important to understand this sequence of weight shifting into empty stance. It's going to begin going from split into elbow strike. Split means flexion of one hip with torsional rotation on the opposite side. In this case, flexion of my left hip, counterclockwise rotation from the right upper waist, and clockwise rotation from the right lower waist. That is split left. I say left because flexion of the left hip is powering the motion. That only gets the weight partially transferred because I still have energy from the upper waist turning towards my left leg, which is keeping the left leg from lifting fully off the ground. Only after doing that do I now rotate the upper waist back to the right into elbow strike. That releases the leg into empty stance. Almost always in empty stance, we're going to be standing in elbow strike. Flexion of the hip and rotation from the upper and lower waist turning away from that hip. That is the core energy of the Tai Chi technique of elbow strike. So we're going from split to elbow strike. It's hard to appreciate that clockwise rotation at the end from elbow strike because what happens is as this left leg flexes up off the ground, that energy pulls the whole body over to the left, even as the upper and lower waist rotation are turning to the right. So if you're in this position, practice this. Take your upper arm, or the only arm, on the side of the lifted leg, turn it away from that leg. Really extend that rotation, and then take your belly button, turn it away from that leg also. Really confirm that position. Clockwise rotation of the entire waist is what's keeping you in this position as you're flexing this left hip. Turn your waist the other way, and you'll see that the position collapses. We have to have all of the energy from the waist turning away from that hip to be in empty stance. And the rotation that you're going to see at the end is coming from the pulling of the hip that's pulling the entire body to the left as you're turning your waist to the right. This creates an optical illusion, which makes many people think that they're really turning their waist to the left, when really you're turning your waist to the right. It's really important to understand what's going on with the actual individual muscles versus what direction the body is facing. We use this combination frequently when we are walking to get onto one leg. When we're walking, if we were going to, say, step up onto a stair or a curb, what we do is split and then elbow strike to get us into empty stance, and then we push to get the foot up onto the stair or the curb. But it's that sequence: split, flexion of the right hip, torsional rotation on the left, to elbow strike. As I turn the waist, upper waist, towards my left leg, it releases the energy from the right leg and allows it to move forward.